That morning, nobody knew the greatest Viking king would choose death over dishonor in the most epic last stand in naval history. September 9th, 1000 AD, King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway stood on the deck of the Long Serpent, the largest warship ever built in Scandinavia. Around him, 70 enemy vessels closed in like wolves surrounding a wounded stag. Danish King Sivin Forkbeard commanded the Eastern Fleet. Swedish King Olaf Skotkonung controlled the northern waters. Most shocking of all, Earl Erik Håkonsson of Norway led the southern squadron. The three most powerful rulers in Scandinavia had united for one purpose: to destroy the Viking king who had dared to bring Christianity to the north, who had burned their sacred temples and toppled their ancient gods, who had transformed Norway from a collection of pagan chieftains into a unified Christian kingdom. But Olaf Tryggvason was no ordinary king. He was the Viking who had raided England and France, who had converted at the sword of Emperor Otto and returned to claim his birthright through conquest, who had built the Long Serpent as a floating fortress capable of crushing any fleet foolish enough to challenge Norwegian supremacy, standing 6 feet tall with golden hair that caught sunlight like spun metal. He was the living embodiment of Viking kingship, the warrior poet who could compose verses while commanding battles, the Christian convert who fought with pagan fury, the king who would rather die as a legend than live as a subject. The Long Serpent that carried him toward his destiny was a masterpiece of northern shipbuilding, 180 feet from stem to stern, powered by 68 oars, and a sail larger than any previously seen in Scandinavian waters. Her dragon prow had been carved by the finest craftsmen in Norway. Her hull had been built from trees that had stood since the time of the gods. Most importantly, her crew consisted of the finest warriors in the north, men who had sworn to follow their king into Valhalla itself, who would rather die beside him than outlive his glory. The alliance that hunted him represented everything Olaf had fought to change. Save Forkbeard ruled Denmark through the old ways, blood sacrificed to Odin, slavery for the weak, endless wars between petty chieftains who cared nothing for their people's suffering. Olaf Skotkonung commanded Sweden with the authority of ancient tradition, temple priests who demanded human offerings, jarls who viewed common folk as property to be bought and sold. Most bitter of all, Erik Håkonsson had been Olaf's own vassal until ambition turned him into a traitor, willing to sell Norwegian independence for the promise of personal power. The trap that brought them together had been planned for months. Secret negotiations between rulers who normally spent their time trying to kill each other, carefully coordinated naval movements that would converge at Svolder Island, most cynically, false intelligence that convinced Olaf his enemies were still fighting among themselves, while they actually prepared the largest combined fleet in Scandinavian history. 70 ships carrying over 7,000 warriors, the greatest naval force ever assembled in northern waters, all focused on destroying one man and his single ship. But Olaf had suspected betrayal long before his scouts confirmed the size of the enemy fleet. Strange reports from his spies about unusual Danish preparations, Swedish ships seen in waters where they had no business sailing. Most telling, Erik Håkonsson's sudden disappearance from the Norwegian court with his personal fleet. The signs pointed to conspiracy, but Olaf chose to sail anyway, not from stupidity or miscalculation, but from the knowledge that some things mattered more than survival, that kingship meant nothing if it wasn't worth dying for. The morning of September 9th brought perfect sailing weather to the waters around Svolder Island. Clear skies, steady winds, and calm seas that would allow precise maneuvering for the naval battle that would determine Scandinavia's future. Olaf's fleet had been reduced to 11 ships after a summer of campaigning. His allies had already departed for their home ports. His reserves were scattered across Norway, too distant to provide support. Everything favored his enemies, except the one thing that mattered most: the quality of the men who would fight beside him. Captain Ulf the Red commanded the Long Serpent's bow section, with the pride of a man who had never retreated from any battle. The veteran warrior from the Lofoten Islands had served Ulf for 15 years, through raids that had terrorized Europe and campaigns that had unified Norway. His axe had carved through English shield walls and French cavalry charges. His loyalty had been tested in a dozen desperate situations and never found wanting. But even Ulf's experience hadn't prepared him for what approached through the morning mist. The enemy fleet that emerged from behind Svolder Island defied every assumption about medieval naval warfare. 70 ships in perfect formation, vessels ranging from sleek Danish raiders to massive Swedish warships. Each crew trained specifically for this moment, each captain chosen for his hatred of the Norwegian king who had dared to challenge the old ways. The combined firepower represented thousands of arrows, hundreds of spears, and enough warriors to overwhelm any defense through sheer numbers. Olaf's response to the sight that should have filled him with despair revealed the character that had made him legendary throughout Europe. He didn't attempt to flee, didn't try to negotiate, didn't show any sign of fear or doubt. Instead, he called for his finest armor and weapons, ordered his crew to prepare for battle, most memorably, began composing the death song that would ensure his name lived forever in northern memory. The king, who faced impossible odds, chose to meet them with style. The psychological warfare began before the first arrow was fired. Danish war horns echoed across the water like the voices of ancient gods calling warriors to final judgment. Swedish drums beat rhythms that had summoned armies since the dawn of time. Norwegian voices from Eric's ships shouted taunts designed to break the morale of men who faced former comrades in battle. The sound was overwhelming, intimidating, calculated to convince Olaf's crew that surrender was their only rational choice. But the Long Serpent's response silenced every enemy horn and drum. Olaf's warriors began singing the song their king had composed moments earlier, verses that spoke of honor more valuable than life, of glory that would outlast empires, of dying well rather than living poorly. The sound of 200 voices raised in perfect harmony carried across the water like a challenge thrown in the face of death itself. This wasn't just defiance. This was acceptance of fate, combined with determination to make that fate memorable. The first assault came from the Danish fleet, which approached the Long Serpent from the east, with the rising sun behind them. 30 ships in arrow formation, their crews trained for coordinated attacks that had conquered half of England. King Savin Forkbeard's personal vessel, the Raven of the Sea, led the charge with its bronze-reinforced ram, aimed at the Norwegian flagship's vulnerable side. Behind it, waves of smaller ships prepared to exploit any breach in Olaf's defenses. What happened next shocked every veteran warrior who witnessed it. Instead of trying to avoid the collision, Olaf ordered his helmsmen to turn directly into the Danish charge. The Long Serpent's reinforced prow struck the Raven amidships with a sound like thunder splitting mountains. The impact shattered Danish timber and sent warriors flying into the cold waters of the Baltic. But more importantly, it announced to every ship in the enemy fleet that the Norwegian king would not be intimidated by superior numbers. The boarding action that followed redefined medieval naval combat. Danish warriors, who leaped onto the Long Serpent's deck, found themselves facing men who fought with the fury of cornered wolves. Olaf himself led the counterattack with a sword that had been blessed by both Christian priests and pagan skalds. Every stroke found its mark. Every movement demonstrated the skill that had made him the most feared warrior king in Europe. Around him, his personal guard fought with the knowledge that they were creating a legend that would be sung in halls not yet built. But the Danish assault was just the beginning. While Olaf's crew dealt with boarders on their starboard side, Swedish ships approached from the north with grappling hooks and siege ladders designed for attacking fortified positions. King Olaf Skudkonung had learned from watching English castle sieges how to apply land warfare techniques to naval combat. His warriors didn't just try to board the Long Serpent, they attempted to capture it like a floating fortress. The defense that followed demonstrated why Olaf's crew was legendary throughout the Viking world. Every man knew his position and responsibility. Archers concentrated their fire on enemy helmsmen and commanders. Spearmen formed barriers that channeled boarding parties into killing zones. Most effectively, the ship's designers had included features specifically for this kind of defense. Hidden compartments that held extra weapons, defensive positions that allowed small numbers to hold off larger forces, secret passages that let defenders strike where enemies least expected. Young Thorstein, the brave, distinguished himself during the Swedish attack by personally killing 3 enemy champions who had boarded near the mast. The 18-year-old son of a minor Norwegian jarl had joined Olaf's crew to seek glory and gold. Instead, he found immortality in the form of courage that would be remembered long after his gold had been spent. When a Swedish berserker broke through the Norwegian line, Thorstein threw himself into the gap without regard for his own survival. His sacrifice bought time for reinforcements to arrive and plug the breach. The most shocking betrayal came when Eric Håkonsson's Norwegian ships joined the assault. Men who had sworn oaths to Olaf found themselves fighting former comrades who spoke the same language and worshipped the same gods. The psychological impact was devastating. These weren't foreign enemies seeking conquest. These were kinsmen who had chosen political advantage over personal loyalty. The sight of Norwegian battle banners attacking the Long Serpent broke the hearts of warriors who had believed brotherhood meant something. But Olaf's response to betrayal revealed the qualities that had made him a king worth following into death itself. He didn't waste time on reproaches or attempts to convert the traitors. Instead, he focused entirely on the battle at hand. When Eric Håkonsson's flagship approached the Long Serpent's port side, Olaf personally led a counterboarding party that cleared the enemy deck in minutes. His message was simple and devastating. Betrayal would be met with consequences, not negotiations. The archery duel that developed between the fleets showcased the finest bowmanship in Scandinavia. Olaf's marksmen, positioned in the Long Serpent's fighting tops, could hit targets at ranges that seemed impossible. Their arrows found gaps in enemy armor, struck down commanders giving orders, and created chaos in the attacking formations. But they faced return fire from hundreds of enemy bows. The sky darkened with arrows flying in both directions. The sound was like hail falling on wooden roofs, except each impact could mean death. Captain Ulf, the Red, fell during the 3rd hour of battle, struck down by a Danish spear, while defending the steering position that controlled the Long Serpent's movement. His death was a devastating blow to Norwegian morale. The man who had been Olaf's right hand for 15 years died, calling out encouragement to his comrades. His last words, according to survivors, were a promise that he would hold a place in Valhalla for every warrior who fell beside his king. The crew who heard him swore to prove worthy of that promise. The turning point came when enemy numbers began to tell. Despite Norwegian courage and skill, 70 ships could afford to lose men and vessels. The Long Serpent could not. Every casualty weakened the defense. Every death reduced the firepower that kept enemies at manageable distances. By midday, it was clear that mathematics would eventually triumph over valor. The question wasn't whether Olaf would be defeated, but how long his resistance could continue. The final assault began when King Savin Forkbeard realized that conventional boarding tactics weren't working fast enough. He ordered his crews to link their ships together, creating a floating platform that could deliver overwhelming force at a single point. The combined weight of Danish, Swedish, and traitorous Norwegian warriors finally breached the Long Serpent's defenses. Enemy forces poured onto the deck like water through a broken dam. The one king who fought 70 ships alone had given Scandinavia a story that would outlast all the kingdoms involved in his destruction. In choosing death over compromise, he had chosen legend over life. The Battle of Svolder ended with his defeat, but began with his transformation into something greater than any earthly monarch, a symbol of courage that would inspire warriors for 1,000 years.